podcast powered by FanDuel Sportsbook, NFL Week 8, Monday Night Football Edition. I am your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. But before we get things rolling this Monday morning, I want to remind all of you, our loyal listeners out there, FanDuel.com/bet-the-board. Take advantage of all the great offers FanDuel's made available to you. $1,000 risk-free bets, enhanced odds, single game parlays, you name it. There are a myriad of ways to put your betting dollars to work for you as early as this evening in a game between the New York Giants and the Kansas City Chiefs. FanDuel.com/bet-the-board. And Payne, we always come in to a Monday morning show with a rough idea of the kind of topics that we're going to hit on, some of the marquee stories from the weekend, the games that have unfolded. This Monday morning, we were dealt a bit of a curveball with a major injury to a Super Bowl contender.
A what?
A major injury to an AFC contender, not a Super Bowl contender. Although, hell, you wouldn't have known it with the way they've played over the last 3 weeks.
So, you actually saw Derrick Henry early on in that game working out the foot on the sideline. And it was taped up, and he came back out there and just a bull. And then right before we started recording, Adam Schefter reported that the foot injury could be one of the broken variety, and that would leave Mr. Derrick Henry out for the season, which is a massive blow, obviously. I think probably at this point, one of the most valuable non-quarterbacks in the league, just based upon not just production, but that's really the engine to the offense because you're using play action off of that. And now you also have a guy like Julio Jones, who missed last week, nagging hamstring injuries that don't feel like they're ever going to be anything more than week to week. And when you're in a matchup against the Rams on Sunday night and you have the ability with Jalen Ramsey to remove A.J. Brown, what's the next option? So, very difficult news for the Titans this morning, who are in full control of the division. I would think this means you're going to get a dose of Jeremy McNichols, and they're going to go out and make a trade. The question is, who's available? All right, are you going to have one of the old Texans backs enter your backfield, or are you going to make a move for someone that's actually a difference maker? And I don't know the answers to that question. I'm not a Gordon guy. I know we talked a little bit off air what that would mean for Javonte Williams, but not really a Gordon guy, but I think he would certainly be an upgrade from what the Titans have. I was never really a Jeremy McNichols guy, right? That's the kid from Boise. I think he kind of phased out early in the league, but rebounded a little bit, reshaped his body, and I think he runs hard. We'll see if they kind of give him the first crack this week and what those results look like. But think about this, Todd. The guy who's actually being shopped, that's probably the best running back available out there, is Marlon Mack, and the Colts certainly aren't going to trade him to the Titans.
Well, I was going to ask that. I mean, if you're a GM, obviously you don't want to trade in the division. The Colts are clearly the biggest competition to the Titans for the division crown this year. How big an asking price do you have for a guy like Marlon Mack? Is it something, if you're Indianapolis, knowing that you're so far behind in the standings as things stand now, if you can get the Tennessee Titans to overpay, do you have to consider it?
If you can get them to overpay, I think you do have to consider it. I just don't know what the pay price is on a running back. Is it a fourth rounder? You go out and you have the Jets this week, and the Rams are facing the Titans next week, and they're, you just kind of look at the odds, 7.5 point dog. Suddenly, those two results happen, and you're 2 games back again with half the season to go. I know you don't have the tiebreaker, you've lost both matchups, but I don't think 2 games is insurmountable to the point where you would give up Marlon Mack to the Titans. I really don't. So that'll be interesting to see what they do this week. If they say, hey, let's test Jeremy McNichols, I do think they add someone regardless. It'll just, I think based upon McNichols' performance will be the direction they go, right? Do they go out and spend a little bit more, or are they comfortable with a guy who becomes like a 1B option? We also have to remember, Darrington Evans, I believe, got injured this week as well.
Yeah, he's been nicked up. I mean, the other name that I think would make some sense if Atlanta is willing to throw in the towel, knowing that Mike Davis is taking on in a reduced role, you pick up the phone, call them. But obviously all speculation with the trade deadline inching ever so close and the Tennessee Titans needing to figure out how they're going to solidify that running back spot if they're going to be a viable contender, not just to win, obviously, the AFC South where they have a commanding lead, but to try and move up in the pecking order as far as the AFC playoff picture is concerned. Normally, Payne, on Monday mornings, we obviously do the good, the bad, and the ugly. We hit on the look-ahead lines and, of course, the big game breakdown for Monday Night Football. And with the good, the bad, and the ugly, typically I'll kick things off. But want to give you the floor and see if there was something that stood out to you in a positive manner to get things going with the right mindset early on this Monday.
Yeah, I kind of banned Eagles talk from this podcast after their performance against the Raiders. And I know last week there was really a difference of opinion on that game from a lot of sharp bettors because the number was short. And so you would see anytime it got to like a natural 3, a group would lay it. And then when it got to like 3.5, you'd have like the value hunters out there saying like, hey, this is the spot for the Lions, right? This is the same price Cincinnati was laying. And so I was kind of suspecting the Eagles would show up here based upon what I was reading and some of the matchups. That was the best defensive performance of the week, I thought, from the Eagles defense. And it's, I think, easy to say, right? Like, yeah, it's the Lions, but still an NFL team. Line was only 3. I thought the Eagles defense was outstanding. And if you look at Goff, negative 0.45 EPA per dropback. That was more than 2 times worse. The second worst performance of the week. And I think it had to do with a little bit of a scheme shift. You had Fletcher Cox call out Jonathan Gannon, saying the defense was not aggressive enough. The defensive line couldn't do anything that it liked doing or made them successful in previous seasons. Nick Sirianni basically said after the Raiders game, the ball never touched the ground. And Gannon responded to both those guys in his presser last week saying, I know. We actually talked about this internally, so it doesn't surprise me it came out publicly. And so their approach was just different. They blitzed at a relatively high rate the first 3 quarters. Goff was pressured on 44% of his dropbacks, and that was one of the best defensive performances of the week, and hopefully that'll be a little bit of a change that we see with the Eagles defense moving forward, right? Like this day and age, with passing offenses, with quarterbacks as good as they are, receivers as good as they are, you can't just give 7 yards, right? You can't just play zone coverage and give up easy pitch and catch plays all day long and expect to be a decent defense. So hopefully we see a little bit of a change defensively from the Eagles moving forward, employing that similar strategy that they used against the Lions.
Yeah, suddenly the Eagles now, given virtue of what we've seen and some of the dominoes that have fallen throughout the NFC, I don't want to say control their own destiny because every team does this early in the season, but other than some of the division leaders, it's as wide open in the NFC for the back half of that playoff picture as we've probably ever seen for a couple of the latter seeds. So it'll be very interesting with an injury to the Saints. Of course, the Vikings lost yesterday, among other things, if Philadelphia can begin to figure it out, but obviously more questions to be answered there. When you talk about defense, Payne, I think the Carolina Panthers defense has been the strength of this unit all season long, and once again, completely suffocated an opponent. And when you look at the Atlanta Falcons, we know they went into the game without Calvin Ridley dealing with some personal issues. But at the same time, Kyle Pitts was a absolute non-factor. And Atlanta really wasn't able to muster much of an offensive thrust. 200 yards of total offense the first 58 minutes. They ran 20 less plays in the game than Carolina did. And Matt Ryan, who'd put up crooked numbers pretty much all season long, held well below 200 yards when the game was still very much hanging in the balance. So for all the shortcomings of Carolina offensively, they continue to dominate on the defensive side, and it looks like their performance against Minnesota a few weeks ago where they gave up nearly 600 yards, much more an anomaly than anything else. Plus, Stephon Gilmore should only help this group get that much stronger.
Yeah, Gilmore was a really nice addition, and it was one of the more bizarre games if you watched it and then you started to look at some of the metrics afterwards. Matt Ryan was actually very accurate. Completion percentage 12% above expectation. But Carolina was really just suffocating. And you mentioned Ridley going down, and at that point, there really isn't anyone that can consistently win one-on-one. We've talked about this receiver group since the preview podcast. Pitts was kind of taken away, and it doesn't shock me, right? Because Carolina plays with some guys in the secondary that are versatile, but they use more defensive backs than just about anybody. And then Pitts had like a monster drop in the first half. Instead of, 1st and 10 from inside the 15, it's 45-yard field goal attempt that Koo misses. But you look at Ryan's completed air yards, just 3.7. So the passes were short and the windows were extremely tight. If you look at Matt Ryan's aggressive throw rate, more than 22%. You're going to struggle as an offense when you're throwing short and into tight windows. It's a bad combination, and that's basically what Atlanta had to do yesterday. I like this Carolina defense. Let's see what Gilmore provides. Does he come back and return to the player of old and give you that J.C. Horn element that changes the complexion of this entire defense? And if that's the case, then we'll get back to a Carolina defense that's one of the best in the league. But that's just really a good matchup yesterday, especially when Ridley goes down. You have an offensive line in Atlanta that's not great, and so the guys can get pressure as well. That was one of the more interesting line movements of the week, Todd.
Yeah, I mean, that thing got...
Just the mindset changed completely. Not just when Ridley went down, but like, you had the early week Atlanta move from one group that seems to bet Atlanta every week for like the last 4 years. And then all of a sudden, once it got to 3, the conversations changed basically the rest of the way, at least the conversations I had with guys.
Yeah, and we saw that game, like you said, even start to tick towards that, 2.8, 2.9 range. Ridley gets ruled out, and then the number comes crashing down off of the full field goal. Carolina doesn't exactly lead box to wire, but showed a tremendous game control in that contest. And, of course, Carolina now will get the de facto revenge game for Stephon Gilmore against his former team this coming weekend in Charlotte when the New England Patriots come a-calling. When we looked at the Tennessee Titans, Payne, we thought this was going to be one of the worst situational spots for a team coming into a game over the last month or so. You talked about upgrading the Titans' overall power rating in the wake of their back-to-back upset victories against the Chiefs and Bills in the span of 6 days. They get themselves down 14-0 early, and you go, hey, look, the situation, everyone identified it. It explains the line move, why the Colts went from +1 to -2.5. But leave it to Indianapolis not being able to handle prosperity. But you pointed out one play in the game that single-handedly changed that outcome.
Yeah, I think you give the Titans all the credit in the world. The spot wasn't great, and all of the bettors who ignore that kind of noise and narrative are feeling great about the situation, I'm sure. But when you're down 14 and you're coming off like those 2 massive wins, it's easy to pack it in. Derrick Henry at that point was on the sidelines figuring out the foot situation, got it retaped, and then came back out. But I think part of that was the Colts getting conservative, which seems to be a staple of Frank Reich past the script. And I understand Jonathan Taylor's fantastic, but there's other ways to incorporate him than just having him run his head into the line of scrimmage. And it's really bizarre to kind of see that conservative nature from a former quarterback. And then you mentioned the big swing plays. They all kind of seem to go against the Colts. And so you had a situation at 14-7. The Colts pick off Ryan Tannehill with about 4 minutes to go in the second quarter. The guy was untouched who made the play, and he tumbles to the ground like 10 yards into the return. He shreds his ACL, and then as he's on the ground, releases the ball. So instead of up 7, 1st and 10 from the Titans 40 going in for the momentum score before break, the ball goes back to the Titans when they recover it, and the game is tied 1 play later. And it's bizarre because we've seen recently where a player slides short of the sticks or the end zone, and the refs say he gave himself up. We saw it last week with Taylor Henneke at the goal line against Green Bay. I'm not sure how that isn't the same call on the Colts pick. The guy tumbles to the ground after he tears his ACL and kind of just gives the ball up. It seems to me like that's him giving himself up. Past that, though, there's other issues with the game, right? We got Carson Wentz trying to throw left-handed again, which led to a pick 6, and the play call is terrible there from the goal line. We're running screen from the 2-yard line, which puts our quarterback into the end zone for some reason. So that was bizarre. Even before the half, right? You are now tied at 14, and you have the opportunity to get the momentum score before the break, and on 3rd and short, you throw a screen behind the line of scrimmage, right? We're not even attempting to throw the ball downfield to Michael Pittman, who's dominant against a secondary without 2 corners. So it's just super conservative things throughout the course of the game. Carson Wentz has the horrific interception in overtime. Mo Alley Cox is like, what are you doing, guy? I'm wide open on the underneath to the same side. It's a free 8 yards, and then watch guys try to bring down a 6'5" tight end. probably gains another 5 or 6. So just bad decision making late in that game from Carson Wentz, but overall some just too conservative, I thought, at times.
Yeah, it was tough to watch, and then almost the complete abandonment of Jonathan Taylor when you've been given a lifeline to even get that game into overtime. But we've seen it time and time again from the Colts, and I think you highlighted the key spot there. You expect a little bit more from Frank Reich, and we're just not getting it at this point. A pivotal game that goes the way of the Tennessee Titans. Anything else that really stood out to you in a positive fashion that deserves highlighting from the week that was in the National Football League?
You know, I think you have to give a couple guys credit, and I'll be quick. Mike White was fantastic, over 400 yards passing with a completion percentage 9% above expectation. That's one of those games where you kind of just have to blindly bet the dog there when you have a market discrepancy of like 8 points week to week, and you know Zach Wilson isn't really worth much at this stage. And it was just one of those horrific spots for Cincinnati, coming off like a Super Bowl win and then having a big division game on deck against the Browns. So not shocking to see the Jets cover. Was really surprised to see them win that game outright. And then I think you give Jimmy G and the 49ers offense some credit. Number 1 in EPA per run, number 1 in EPA per pass of any offense week 8. I know Khalil Mack was out, and we do think the Bears defense might start to regress some, but they still have a top 10 defense. So very impressed with Jimmy G and the 49ers offense as well.
With the good comes the bad. One last thing I want to highlight for the good. Do we give the Packers full marks for their game plan and the way they went about handling Arizona on Thursday night? We've seen it time and time again. A skill position player out. Aaron Rodgers makes the best of a bad situation. I do feel for overbettors who had to sweat that thing out and weren't able to cash a ticket with back-to-back goal line stands. But this was a Green Bay defense that I think you and I still have major reservations about, who arguably played its best game of the season on its biggest stage.
Yeah, I think you do give the Packers credit. And it was a short week. It was on the road. You're traveling to a different time zone, and you're extremely shorthanded. And I think offensively, we saw Green Bay employ a physical style. A.J. Dillon ran hard. Aaron Jones ran really hard. We saw Aaron Jones out of the backfield. If you listen to the Monday Night Football preview, that wasn't a surprise at all. I thought Aaron Rodgers did just enough in the pass game to keep the defense honest. And then defensively, huge game for the Packers. I think we're all kind of wondering what the hell Joe Barry was doing the last couple of weeks, and suddenly he's not there, and his replacement stepped up. I believe Jerry Gray was the guy who was handling most of the duties, and I think the linebacker coach, Kirk Olivadato is his name, did very well, stepping up. So give some of the replacement coaches some credit as well. And I think you mix that in with Arizona starting slow again at home and Hopkins not being 100%. And you kind of have that situation unfold the way it did. I don't know what to make of Arizona, right? I know they're good. I know they're talented. But again, a lot of times offensively, why we don't see that consistency, it's backyard football. And Cliff Kingsbury isn't really the greatest offensive mind, right? It's not overly difficult to like come out and be like, hey, we want to be a spread offense. That's not necessarily like, you know, we think of passing the ball in 2021 and like, oh, that's innovative. Like that's how we need to do things. And so just because you run spread doesn't mean you're innovative. There's very little meshing of plays. And I think we've talked about this before. It's very rare that like first down and 10 at the opponent or at your own 38 leads to something you're setting up 4 plays later. It's just kind of a hodgepodge of just like spread passing plays. It's very weird but there's a ton of talent, so it's worked, right? Like the offensive line over the last few years has been rebuilt. You have 2 backs that complement each other, one that can, you know, catch balls out of the backfield, the other one that's kind of a sledgehammer in short yardage, and then you have a loaded receiver group and a quarterback that's mobile and can throw it a country mile. So it's a loaded offense, but you see like large stretches where it's not very good at certain times, and it's because it's just kind of a weird offense schematically.
Yeah, I think this is a team that we've seen tail off over the last couple of years as we've gone deeper into the season with a bigger target on their back this year than they've had in the past. Let's see how Arizona handles a bit of prosperity as early as this weekend with a key divisional game up in the Bay Area, as the 49ers will be hell-bent on getting a revenge for a 17-10 loss earlier in the season. With the good, though, comes the bad, Payne, and I don't know if you want to take the bait with the low-hanging fruit given what we saw last night for the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, I mean, I sent out a tweet the second the game ended, and my feelings have not changed, and so I'll just kind of read the tweet. But here goes. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Mike Zimmer's ultra-conservative game plan and Clint Kubiak's horrific play calling are why the Vikings don't have 5+ wins. Organizations would die for Jefferson, Cook, Thielen trio, and Minnesota waste them. And that's what we got last night. Instead of devising a game plan that built a lead and would make Cooper Rush and the Cowboys offense one-dimensional, that's not what you got. You got a team that was able to hang around and fight and build confidence throughout because they were within touch the entire way. And that's really how things unfolded. You know, I thought Cooper Rush was pretty good. I'm not going to laud him the way the rest of the internet is. If you take away 2 plays, the 3rd and 8 where Alexander looks lost in the slot and he's like kind of gathering himself before the play, and you have the deep pass to make it 10-10, and you remove the ball that connects probably 0.01% of the time down the sideline to Amari Cooper, where it's kind of hits Brashad Breeland in the chest, bounces up, and finds Amari Cooper. You remove those 2 plays, and Cooper Rush's day looks a lot different. But even when we talk about the conservative approach offensively, right, where you're not getting like Thielen and Jefferson involved and like you're throwing the ball to Ham behind the line of scrimmage incessantly.
High percentage play calls, of course, with huge EPA implications.
You also were very conservative with how you elected to cover. And I understand CeeDee Lamb's an absolute nightmare to cover. And I understand that Amari Cooper is an absolute threat anytime he touches the ball and one of the league's best route runners. But Cooper, you saw, was kind of coming in and out of the game. And so he wasn't 100% with the hamstring. There's no reason you're not playing man press on CeeDee Lamb with help over the top and forcing Cooper Rush to throw into tight windows or throw the ball deep. Instead, you're playing off coverage. You're immediately dropping your corners. And so it becomes pitch and catch for Cooper Rush, and he gains confidence when CeeDee Lamb's going out there and running a 9-yard comeback, and the closest defender is 8 yards away from him. That's how you let a young quarterback on the road build confidence. And so Zimmer, I thought, was terrible defensively, and I understand what the numbers will look like. It'll look like, you know, the defense was fantastic, and there was certainly some luck elements. But if you're a defensive-minded head coach, you can't have a defensive lapse on 3rd and 8 to start the 3rd quarter, right? You can't up 3, have your defense be the reason you blow the game, and then you lose your mind and you don't know when to like call timeouts, so you call back-to-back timeouts. Now, the Zebras blew that. You're supposed to ignore that by the rule book. And there shouldn't be a delay of game 5-yard penalty. But your defense then also can't tackle Zeke, right? They gave up. They're like, hey, we're gonna dump this ball off for 4 yards. One of your 4 guys make a tackle, and like let's send this thing into overtime. And Zimmer's defense couldn't do that. So just a wildly disappointing game from the Vikings, and really that's what we've seen all season.
Yep.
Nothing has changed.
You'd have hoped at some point in that contest, knowing that Cooper Rush was going to be a little bit limited with his experience making his first career start, that the Vikings would have been able to find the ability to build a 2-score lead at least at one point. To see if it forced Dallas out of its comfort zone, it never came to fruition, and regardless of the number you had on Minnesota, for a game that closed 3.5-4, the Vikings lose outright 20-16. Payne, everybody a couple of short weeks ago wanted to anoint Justin Herbert the next great quarterback in the National Football League, and I'm not saying the the potential isn't there for him to realize all of it, but suddenly he gets matched up with a Bill Belichick defense again, and Herbert looks rather human. An erratic 18 for 35 performance, 2 touchdowns, although one came when they were trailing by 10 as he threw into triple coverage down the sidelines. Thankfully, it was caught. And when you look at some of the decision-making and inaccuracy he dealt with, Justin Herbert looked human for the second straight week against a very good AFC opponent.
Yeah, that was one of the games that we thought had a really good matchup, and we went over very early in the week, over 47.5. Ultimately closed 50.5 as a consensus, although some of the sharper shops saw one out west that books to a certain person was dealing 51.5. Fortunately, you mentioned that pass down the sidelines. Very, very nice for us. Should have been over, I think, a little bit sooner. You had some run plays that were touchdowns called back. You had some issues inside the 10-yard line from the Patriots offense early on in that game. I don't know what to make of the Chargers. I watched the game, so it was one that I kind of was going to wait to go back and reassess and dig into some of the numbers. But for week 8, in terms of EPA per dropback, only the Lions were worse than the Chargers, and that was off the bye. That was with all the talk of Brandon Staley kind of helping Joe Lombardi figure out their situations and issues on early downs. And so that didn't really come to fruition. So I think we kind of take a step back in the Brandon Staley assessment, and we kind of just let this breathe for a bit. I know there's a ton of talent on the Chargers, and that's one thing that we've been constantly saying, like, hey, I know some of the metrics don't look great, but once they get this thing figured out, they'll be humming. We just have to figure out if the coaches are able to kind of make things look a little bit better and put these players in the best positions possible to succeed, because Joe Lombardi isn't really doing that right now. And Justin Herbert missed some throws yesterday. Brandon Staley, we've kind of all praised him because he's like one of the few coaches that knows when to go for it on 4th and 2 from the opponent 33, and we suddenly think he's a Super Bowl coach. And he has great press conferences and talks about EPA, so we all kind of coddle up to him, but his defense stinks right now. And so we'll see what comes of the Chargers. Huge game this week against the Eagles. They're going to have to get some things figured out.
Expectations are always interesting. A lot of people anointed them the winners of the AFC West with a hell of a lot of the season still to go. After back-to-back losses, suddenly the Chargers look human. And like you said, a number that tells a very compelling story for the trip across country to take on Philadelphia, where the Chargers are a 2.5-point favorite in that particular matchup. Payne, anything else stick out to you from the negative fashion, or something that we should bucket into the ugly terminology?
I see what you did there. Listen, I don't really know what to make of the Bucs' performance. Obviously, they cut the game down to, I believe, 2 points, and the Saints just fought back. I think we give more credit to the Saints than we kind of crap on the Bucs here. I thought the Saints defense did a fantastic job. They give up a net 20 to Tom Brady when they could have probably hung their heads with Jameis going down early. They closed the game in a big way. All right, that was still for the taking late, and the defense showed up once again. Dennis Allen, we kind of highlighted him in our preview of that game and how he had held Tom Brady and the Bucs offense under 5 yards per play in each of the 3 meetings last year. And I thought he did very well again here. Obviously, the early touchdown drive by the Buccaneers required a ton of, 3rd and 7 plus conversions to score that touchdown. I believe 2. And so that's not overly sustainable. You give up the long pass late. So you did have some miscues as a defense, but overall, once you kind of factor in the pick 6, I thought they did a very fine job, and I think Sean Payton deserves all the credit in the world. I mean, he is one of the best offensive minds there is. You really feel bad for Jameis Winston coming into this game. Sure, there was talks of Jameis improving a little bit and limiting some of his turnovers, but that was a guy prior to this week that was on pace for 37 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. He sat last year, and Sean Payton kind of molded him into the quarterback that he wanted. And so it's tough to see that happen. It looks like Taysom Hill will be back this week. So ultimately, what does that mean? Is it Trevor Siemian? Is it Taysom Hill? Probably a mixture of both. But at this point, when you look at this roster, and I know the defense has a ton of talent and it's going to keep you in games, offensively, it's just basically a really good offensive line in Alvin Kamara. And there is not much else. And Sean Payton is going to deserve Coach of the Year if somehow the Saints continue this trajectory and make the playoffs, in my mind.
How dare you not talk more glowingly about Mark Ingram and the instant impact he had donning the number 14, who I had to look at the roster because I watched the game on mute and had no idea who the hell that was, carrying the football or getting touches early on out of the backfield in those white jerseys. But there's no doubt that the Saints, a team that have overachieved early on in the campaign. I will say one thing for the Bucs, and somewhere along the way, you have to clean it up a little bit. The turnovers are one thing and more of an anomaly with Tom Brady struggling when you accumulate 420 plus yards and 7.3 yards per play. But this was an undisciplined defense. 11 penalties for 99 yards, and they took penalties at key junctures in that game. I know it's early in the season. I'm not saying it's a reason to panic, but Todd Bowles has to get some of those boys in line for being a little bit more disciplined at key junctures.
It's an aggressive defense by nature, so you're going to have some of those penalties, and that's ultimately the catch-22 is you want a defense that kind of sits back and has choir boys, or do you want a very downhill attacking defense that when you kind of just think about some of the players from JPP to Nnamdi Suh to Devin White to Levante David, they're all a little bit of a different breed mentally. And so, you're going to get that aggressive downhill, want to hit you so hard your mom feels it kind of defense. And that's just kind of the vibe that they play with. The question becomes is, can the secondary get healthy in time to make this playoff push? And I think they will. So, they're going to get some things figured out because I like what I see offensively. You mentioned the 7.3 yards per play. Massive difference from what the 3 meetings yielded last year against the Saints. And you can run the ball a little bit better this year. And so it's a different dynamic. Let's see how long the Antonio Brown situation lasts. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion, right? Is he going to play this week? And I'm getting pictures sent to me. The guy's on crutches. So it was never going to happen. I believe they have a bye this week. Correct me if I'm wrong, Todd. And so we'll see what happens with Antonio Brown in 2 weeks, if he's there or not. I think he's a vital part to this offense. He just kind of provides that extra layer because with 2 guys, there are defenses that can kind of remove Evans a little bit. But all of a sudden you add in that third party, and it's very weird and difficult, I think, where you're going to see defenses be able to match all 3 guys. And so if you elect to put more guys in coverage, then all of a sudden the improved run game is beating you up. It's really an offense that's fantastic right now when I look at it. They're going to be tough to beat.
Tampa indeed on a bye, which made it relatively surprising that Rob Gronkowski even tried to come back yesterday and only was out there for 4 snaps before he suffered through some back spasms. But you're exactly right. The Bucs were able to put up 7+ yards per play, and that was with Mike Evans only catching 2 balls for 48 yards. He had the 1 big touchdown. And time again, we've seen Marshawn Lattimore take him out. But when you have to contend with Chris Godwin and an Antonio Brown, it's going to put a team even as talented defensively as the New Orleans Saints in a precarious position. One last thing before we get to the look-ahead lines, and I know we're nitpicking a little bit given the fact that the Pittsburgh Steelers exceeded expectations, beating the Cleveland Browns 15-10 in a game that was being bet like they already knew the final score in regard to a game day move that closed 5.5, depending on the shop. Mike Tomlin calling a fake field goal with under 2 minutes left in the half, had a chance to take a 6-3 lead, felt it was a little bit odd and bizarre given the fact that the Steelers were going to double up. Their defense had been lights out. It also got his kicker destroyed, and they weren't able to kick field goals or kick off effectively for the remainder of the game, but it did not matter. They were still able to upend the Cleveland Browns.
So just for our listeners out there, you started that with a we. Do you have a mouse in your pocket? Because I am not going to bash Mike Tomlin for going out on the road, winning outright in a division game.
I'm not bashing him. I'm giving him credit. I'm merely questioning one poor decision that could have had massive ramifications. To Tomlin's credit,
100+ snaps in the game. I did see the play in Boswell. It was like, it's right out of Madden. It was a hit stick. I think he got hit 4 yards inbounds and he landed by the cheerleaders. And it's just kind of one of those things where you see like the kicker carrying the ball, and all of a sudden the defense's eyes light up, and you're like, we're going to send this guy into oblivion. And that's exactly what happened. And you see like Boswell kind of like floundering like a fish out of water. It was really funny to see.
Kickers aren't meant to get hit. They're not meant to get hit. They're out there to kick and smoke cigarettes and do whatever the hell else they want during practice, as long as they come up clutch.
It wasn't the best decision, but give Pittsburgh some credit for winning outright on the road as an underdog.
I will. It's a big divisional game and a Steelers team that I think a lot of us believe were poised to finish 8-9 with their absolute ceiling, now suddenly very much in the thick of things in the NFC North when you knock off the Browns on the road. And of course, the Cincinnati Bengals stubbed their toe. Massive showdown coming this upcoming week within the division as well, with the Browns doing battle with the Bengals. The Steelers have a fortuitous bounce on Monday night against the Chicago Bears, a game that will break down a week from today. Perfect time to remind all of you, our loyal listeners, follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You, of course, can follow me there as well. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, when we look at some of the look-ahead lines here, massive movements that we haven't quite seen so far this season, since early on when odds makers are looking to adjust their power numbers. And since there's so much ground to cover, don't need to rattle off any of them in great detail, but we're looking at Thursday Night Football. You had the Colts, a 10.5 point favorite in the game against the Jets. I mean, look ahead wise, they were 14-point chalk. The Colts lose. Mike White looks outstanding. And here we are with about a field goal adjustment in a standalone spot.
Yeah, that's basically what you get, right? 11.5 to 14, obviously some decent numbers with some importance there, I guess. At 14 and 13, it's Mike White looks competent, and that's what it comes down to. There's a readjustment for Mike White, and now you're saying there's probably zero downgrade from Zach Taylor. And it's a short week game, and the Colts didn't look great. T.Y. Hilton a little bit banged up. So it'll be interesting to see where this line goes from there. Wouldn't be shocked to see some over money enter the market after Mike White's performance.
New England and Carolina, Pat's listed as a 2-point favorite on a look-ahead number. They're now laying a full field goal. Obviously, questions about Carolina at the quarterback position. Will we get Sam Darnold out there, or will the P.J. Walker experience fully commence against New England's defense?
Yeah, that was a really big hit. And Darnold's helmet comes off as he's being hit, and then his head smashes the ground. So we'll see what comes of Sam Darnold. Obviously, not the best quarterback, but if you've seen P.J. Walker play, oof. And so if it is Walker, this line will continue to tick up a little bit. I don't necessarily know how the Patriots' offense will fare against Carolina here. Certainly they want to run the ball. And Carolina's been a little susceptible to the run because they play a little bit lighter of a defense. But I'm not sure how Mac Jones will fare through the air in this game. So it'll be interesting to see ultimately who's under center. But that is most of the reason for the movement is the Darnold injury. And then obviously, the Patriots go out and win on the road as a dog. That's going to change the power number a little bit.
Buffalo Bills go from an 11-point road favorite at Jacksonville now up to 2 touchdowns. Buffalo somehow finds a way to get to the window as a 14-point closing line favorite against the Miami Dolphins, although I should say that game did get as high as 15 in some spots.
Yes, it did.
And when you look at Jacksonville, they get absolutely boat race coming off the bye up in the Pacific Northwest against the Seahawks.
What are the Jaguars going to do offensively here? You have a bye week. You're going against a Seattle defense on a short week, and it's not a great defense. And the only points you muster are late in garbage time. This is a byproduct of an Urban Meyer offense that really isn't very good, and it's not overly sophisticated. And we saw the potency of his offense really start to diminish in his latter years at Ohio State. And so, again, I go back to the line of when you don't have 5-star recruits playing against 3 stars, suddenly the handing the ball off and then throwing with RPO is not overly sophisticated, and defenses are catching on to that. We'll see what transpires here. But I would expect Buffalo to have some success through the air. I'm not going to go lay 14.5 on the road, but not a surprise that we've seen a move here.
Rams, 4-point favorites on the look-ahead in Sunday Night Football. We now know about the Derrick Henry injury. That number out through a touchdown at 7.5 in most locations, including FanDuel Sportsbook.
Yeah, I thought this was higher if my memory is correct. I believe FanDuel's look-ahead was 4, and then we're out to 6.5 on the reopen. And now all of a sudden this morning you go from 6.5 to 7.5 on the news of Derrick Henry being out. And again, it comes down to, I think, the matchup, right? With Derrick Henry out, with Julio Jones questionable, and who knows if he'll ever be 100% again. The hamstring is probably going to require like multiple surgeries post-retirement. And so if Julio is not there, then it becomes Ryan Tannehill throwing to A.J. Brown. And I think that's a spot where Jalen Ramsey says, hey, guys, rather than moving me around and playing me in the slot, let me just remove A.J. Brown from this game. And so at that point, the question becomes, what can the Titans offense do? I think there's still some issues, even though they're playing at a rate that I just did not believe could happen. It's not a good secondary by any stretch, but with the components that are missing, I'm surprised the Titans secondary is playing, I guess we'll call it bad. I thought they would be horrific. But I think the Rams obviously have enough juice in the pass game to give the Titans some trouble. And so if you have a Ryan Tannehill throwing from shotgun without the play action element and A.J. Brown is being guarded by Jalen Ramsey, you start to question what the offense could look like.
Well, if you're going to question that offense, you may question what Justin Fields looks like in Monday Night Football at Heinz Field against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittsburgh, a 4.5-point favorite on the look-ahead numbers at FanDuel Sportsbook, now seeing the Steelers a shade less than a touchdown, laying 6.5.
They are, and there's a couple spots that just went to 7. So that will be interesting, a game that we will break down a week from today.
See what you get from the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team that thrives as an underdog and oftentimes struggles when they have a target on their back. But you'll have to wait until Monday to get the full-scale breakdown there. One final thing to take care of, Payne, before we close up shop here on a Monday morning. It, of course, is the Monday Night Football game featuring the New York Football Giants against the Kansas City Chiefs. And when you're looking at these numbers right now currently available at FanDuel, we're seeing Kansas City, a 10.5-point favorite, total in the game at 52.5. We know about Daniel Jones. He's been a road warrior, 11-5 against the spread on the road during his NFL career, 10-3 against the spread as a road underdog. You're going to hear stories leading up to kickoff about how Kansas City has underwhelmed at the betting window, compiling a 3-12 against the spread record the last 15 regular season games. Injury-wise, the Giants' offense not anywhere close to 100%. No Kenny Golladay, no Saquon Barkley, Sterling Shepard, and Kadarius Toney expected to play. Everybody is some variation of banged up. But when you look at the Giants offensively, will they have the pieces and the game plan to go about attacking a Kansas City defense that's really struggled not just against the run, but even where they're supposed to be at their best against the pass?
I'm not sure what it is, and maybe you can give me your thoughts and opinions, but it seems like getting away from New York in some of that media, and then, it is a stadium that does have swirling winds. Whatever it is, Daniel Jones is a different quarterback on the road. And if you look at some of his splits, they are glaring. Daniel Jones, through the first 3 seasons, has generally been, I'm going to put this kindly, below a replacement level quarterback at home. 15 touchdowns, 19 picks, 75 passer rating. But somehow on the road, Daniel Jones has been NFL starter quality. 25 touchdowns, 7 picks, 94 passer rating. Yards per pass attempt increase, rush numbers are better. You name it. He is a substantially better quarterback on the road. So, if someone has the reason for that, feel free to shoot us a note, because I would be very interested in why that is the case. You also look at the last 4 defenses the Giants have played, they're all top 11 in defensive efficiency. Average rank of those 4 defenses, 7th. And now you get number 31 Kansas City. And as you alluded to, all signs point to the Giants' offensive health improving somewhat with Sterling Shepard and Kadarius Toney. If you do keep things fair, this is a step down in class for the Chiefs defense, who's faced the 6th toughest schedule of offenses. And we saw last week, Kansas City had to sell out to stop Derrick Henry. They stopped him. 3 yards a carry. Problem was the secondary was left exposed, especially on play action, and I think we outlined that in the breakdown of that game, that play action gives them trouble. And then you mentioned it, I believe, last Monday in the recap, how good Tannehill was throwing with play action. And some of the numbers with Tannehill's play action gets distorted a little bit because he did throw a pick against the Chiefs with that. But if you look at all the other underlying metrics, 91% adjusted accuracy, almost 16 yards an attempt on those 11 play action passes for Tannehill against the Chiefs defense. If you look at the Giants and how they are built offensively, they're not overly imposing running it. The O-line's 31st in line yards created. It's resulted in a rush efficiency metric of 25th. So if the Chiefs can play the run straight, the secondary probably doesn't get exposed the way they did against the Titans. Daniel Jones has used play action a fair amount, 29%, but oddly, his ADOT is a yard shorter. His turnover-worthy throws are up. And the interesting part is when you kind of break down play action to another level, he's been horrific using play action from shotgun, but he's been fantastic using play action from under center, mostly 12. And the Chiefs are the most sensitive play action defense from under center. They allow a 69% success rate, positive 0.49 EPA per pass. So let's see kind of, you mentioned at the top, and we're like, what's the scheme going to be? What is Jason Garrett going to do? We'll see. Hopefully, it's something that is a little bit more competent, that matches metrically with the things that would make sense, but we'll see. Daniel Jones being mobile could present some issues for Kansas City. We've seen dual threat quarterbacks show pretty well against the Chiefs. If you looked at his rushing prop number last night, it was 19.5. We're out to like 22.5 as of right now. So relatively speaking, some sharp money on Daniel Jones's rushing prop over from a guy I know. Again, I think we're in week 8 now, and you're kind of who you're going to be. You listen to Frank Clark and a couple of the leaders on the Chiefs defense. They think they're close and trending in the right direction, but they just need to figure out how to go from being a bottom feeder to a below average defense. And I think that really starts tonight. Maybe the drop down in class helps. The Giants have also been very slow starting. If you look at kind of their points distribution, more points in the fourth quarter than the first half this season. They're averaging less than a touchdown in the opening half. So if the Giants start slow, it'll make them a little bit one-dimensional, and I think it becomes a little bit more difficult, pulling off this upset as a double-digit dog on the road.
The other side of the ball, Kansas City, of course, has not been as dynamic as we all expected them to be coming into the season, mainly plagued by turnovers. 17 of which, 9 interceptions, 8 fumbles early on in the campaign. Patrick Mahomes showed to be somewhat human in his last performance against the Tennessee Titans, largest loss in his career, regular or postseason, at 24 points. Snapped a streak of 31 straight games with a touchdown pass, which was the 9th longest in NFL history. Threw his 9th interception, tied for most in the NFL, alongside such supporting cast like Zach Wilson, and his 6th straight game with an interception. But when you look at this Giants defense, it shouldn't instill, it's easy for me to say, the Kansas City Chiefs offense with fear, given the fact that I think it's a little bit more smoke and mirrors than it is anything substantial. Is this the game where Kansas City can finally look to break out, get the ground game on track, get Tyreek Hill going, and get Travis Kelce, who's putting together good numbers but not great by his high standards, on track?
So I think this becomes a really simple and straightforward discussion, not necessarily just the Giants tonight, but in general. What are the Chiefs going to do to make defenses change what they're currently giving them as a look? And I think that becomes ultimately how this ship gets turned around. For tonight, I'm really interested to see what Patrick Graham chooses to do defensively. I mean, the formula's out there, right? And the formula's working. Defenses are frustrating Kansas City. And it started way back in October 2020, Todd, when your Raiders went into Arrowhead and basically used this rush 3, keep a spy, and drop the rest defense. Tampa used that approach in the Super Bowl. And now every team is using basically their version of it. Defenses don't blitz Patrick Mahomes anymore at all, right? It's like a shade over 10.5%. Mahomes is the least blitz quarterback in the NFL. And then teams are playing a too high shell. Defenses are making Kansas City go 9, 10, 12 plays to score. And right now, KZ just hasn't adapted or refuses to adapt to what defenses are giving them. And you can kind of see Mahomes at times falling back into some of his old habits at Texas Tech, where he kind of loses his form and his technique turns to shit and it becomes backyard football. And then other times, it's a lot of unlucky turnovers going through receivers' hands. Either way, 17 giveaways in 7 games. And so the only way that this is going to change and force defenses to change the looks they're giving you, you have to be able to run the ball into the light boxes. And Mahomes and Tyreek have to be willing and not get frustrated if the explosive play isn't there, right? You have to be fine taking the 6, 7, 8 yard pass. That's the only way you're going to force defenses to change what they're currently doing. And you start to wonder if you have some of the components. I know we all look at the Chiefs and Andy Reid and like, oh my God, there's, so fantastic. They have all the talent in the world. But the reality is, like, I love Tyreek Hill. He's probably a top 3 receiver. But is that a guy that's going to consistently be the most precise route runner in the 6 to 12 yard range? Probably not. And so you're seeing Byron Pringle get a little bit more burn because he doesn't necessarily have the high-end talent, but he's a guy who can run routes and find holes in kind of space. Like, who are your, like, key route runners? Kelsey's probably good. You don't have a very good running back room. You refuse to get Jerick McKinnon more involved. So some of these things that we're requesting them to do, I don't necessarily know if they have the pieces. Like, Robinson isn't a guy that's going to really beat you with his route running acumen. Let's see if this changes. They need to figure out how to run the ball. They need to be efficient throwing and willing in that 6, 7, 8 yard range. And if you can do that for a couple games, all of a sudden you're going to start getting the looks you want, and the explosiveness will open up off of that. That's the only way this is going to change. So what tonight comes down to are really 2 of those things. Can the Giants get natural pressure? It's a big question. The Giants haven't been able to do that. They blitz the 10th highest rate, and they're the 4th worst in pressure rate. 1 game sample, so anything can happen, but the indicators would say no. The second thing is, can the Giants stop the run with the light box? And oddly, a team that was pretty good stopping the run the last few years isn't very good this year. Bottom 3rd in the NFL in stopping the run, despite facing one of the 5 easiest run schedules. There's a lot of questions, and I kind of hinted at this on our pregame show, which you should subscribe to on YouTube every Friday at noon. Andy Reid, for the first time, Todd, seemed really dejected in his pressers this week. And
he wasn't as dejected as Patrick Mahomes having a little chips and queso with his wife and brother in the Mexican restaurant in the middle of last week. That's for sure.
I don't like seeing the sodium intake days before the game. We got to get that figured out, Patrick.
It ain't TB12 territory, Payne. It's not going to let him play into his mid-40s.
We've seen, Super Bowl losers have really terrible following seasons, okay? And no matter how much we analyze the matchup, it just doesn't seem to matter. We had Tyrann Mathieu criticizing the fan base on social media and then coming out and having to apologize. And as you alluded to, right, there's clips of Mahomes out to eat. It looks like he's hating his life with his wife and brother, and who appear to be just unbearable humans at this juncture in time. Tonight, we're going to find out if the Chiefs are going to keep the season alive or if it just ends. And this might be more of a mentality thing than necessarily a talent and X's and O's thing. Tonight is just a game where there's some guessing involved. Like, what Chiefs team are you going to get? Big game for them. And certainly not running to get out there and lay the 10.5, that's for sure.
What have you seen? And that was the last thing that I wanted to close with this Monday morning. What have you seen in terms of the number? We saw it get as low as 9.5. We've seen the total pretty much stay steady in that 52.5 range. Anything worth disclosing as far as money movement there so far?
As I'm looking at it right now, like one of the sharpest shops went to 11. So early in the week, I did see a touch of Giants money come in when it initially was at 10.5, and that's the reason why you could have got 9.5 or 9. I have not heard anything new on this game, but obviously yesterday afternoon and this morning, we're kind of seeing that trickle come in on Kansas City. I don't know what to make of the total. Our model shows some value to the under, actually. But again, when you kind of use Daniel Jones road splits only, and you start to think about what the Giants defense hasn't been able to do with getting natural pressure or stopping the run, suddenly you're unsure if they can play the style of defense that has given the Chiefs trouble. And so even though the model shows value, we have not gone under on this game. So that's kind of where we're at. I have not bet this game. I don't have anything on it. None of the guys that I am closest to have bet this game as of yet.
You can put me in the same bucket. Not $1 invested in tonight's game whatsoever. See if there's a prop worth uncovering or something else along those lines, which would be a minor secondary position at best. Any final words of wisdom, parting shots you'd like to offer up before we get a 48-hour break from one another? Our loyal listeners have a chance to rest, regroup, and we try and get the college football train back on the tracks come Wednesday morning.
Yeah, that'll be the key. The ASU game was as ugly as it gets. In the first half, under in Steelers-Browns was as easy as it gets. So we're continuing to kind of grind out some 1-1s and still very profitable on the season for best bets and try to get the locomotive headed in the right direction.
That is the name of the game. There is no activity out there, whether it's sales and trading or whether it's working in the gambling space, that'll force you into mental gymnastics more than trying to figure out where your reads have gone right and you haven't received the results, or where you're doing things the right way and eventually the hard work pays dividends. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You, of course, can follow me there as well. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. Best of luck with all of your Monday night football investments on the Chiefs and Giants. We'll be back with you on Wednesday for a little college football chatter, and right back here for the National Football League Week 9 breakdowns on Thursday. Hopefully we'll see you at the window.